So thank all of you. I will end the statement so we can now move to the absolutely fantastic and dynamic conversation that we're going to have here coming up. But I have to share with you, some of you that may have been here this morning may have known, may have heard this, but those of you that were not, I have to share with you one of the most apt quotes from the founder of Carl Jensen. It's one of my favorite quotes from Carl. He wrote in 1995, and I wanted to share it with you because I think it's so, well, it's really relevant to what's going on today in our media. Carl wrote in 1995, "Since we will all benefit from a more responsible media, we all really should help bring it about. To do this, the corporate media owners should start to earn their unique First Amendment privileges. Editors should rethink their news judgment. Journalists should persevere in going after the hard stories. Journalism professors should emphasize ethics and critical analysis and turn out more muckrakers and fewer buckrakers. The judicial system should defend the freedom of the press provision of the First Amendment with far more vigor, as we saw they just did with Amy Goodman in North Dakota this past week. It was sad to say that was kind of almost a surprising development, given how much cynicism is around what goes with media. But this is what is supposed to happen, right? The courts are supposed to protect the First Amendment and journalists, not shoot the messenger, which is what the government does with Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, and Julian Assange particularly. And that's very ongoing. Carl Jensen went on to say, "The public should show the media it's far more concerned with the high crimes and misdemeanors of its political and corporate leaders than it is with the crimes and gossip of celebrities. The effort will be well worth it." I couldn't agree more, and 40 years later, here at Project Censored, we still think it's well worth it. And we thank all of you for you thinking that it's well worth the effort. And thank you so much for coming this evening. And I would like to now introduce our illustrious panel to you. So thank you, everybody, for coming. We have the distinct pleasure of having some wonderful friends and guests here. And they can all come up and sort of populate the table as I make room and clean my junk off the table. I would like to, I'm going to read everyone here for you, and then you can give them a warm welcome. Abby Martin is the creator and host of the Empire Files, an investigative news program broadcast weekly by Telesur English. She's former host of RT's Breaking the Set and founder of Media Roots with her brother Robbie Martin, who is also here today. Abby Martin contributed to a chapter in Project Censored in 2017, and Abby, once upon a time, used to come and shoot our videos, work with us on KPFA radio, and just an honor to be working with you, and it's so exciting to see the very important work that you're doing, Abby. I'd like to also bring up Mnar Muhawesh from MintPress News. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of MintPress News and host of the program Behind the Headline. Project Censored judges selected one of Mnar's news stories for inclusion in the top 25 this year on Syria, an ever-timely story. And she also contributed to another chapter in Censored 2017. And MintPress News is live streaming the event, from my understanding. So, Mnar, it's a pleasure to see you. Our next guest, Mark Crispin Miller. He is a professor of media culture and communication at New York University, author of numerous articles, books on media censorship and election fraud, including Loser Take All, Election Fraud and the Subversion of Democracy, 2000 to 2008. He's the curator of Open Road media series Forbidden Bookshelf, a project that republishes titles of America's repressed history that focused on issues and events that are too often left in the dark, including abortion, organized crime, the CIA, financial inequality. Mark Crispin Miller, I am proud to say, wrote the foreword to Censored 2017. Thank you, Mark. Last but surely not least, David Talbot. David is the best-selling author, most recently of The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, the CIA and America's Secret Government. Talbot was the founding editor of Salon.com. His most recent endeavor is Hot Books, a new imprint in partnership with Skyhorse Publishing that's producing hard-hitting, muckraking titles on key issues of our time that often escape the attention of the corporate media. And it is an honor to not only know, but work with such wonderful people. And I'm going to turn things over right now to Abby Martin.
Thank you. So, is this on? Man. Great. Well, it's great to be back. Yes, now I can hear it. No, I got my start with Project Censored. I was an anti-war activist, and then I realized that media was really the most important issue of our time, because no one can hear about any issue that you're fighting about unless there's some sort of media platform to get that issue across. So they took me under their wing and really taught me so much about this program and media literacy. And I think it's one of the most important, if not the most important, media organizations in the entire country, if not the world, because instead of journalists sitting in their elite ivory towers in DC telling you what the news is based on their agenda and financing, this is coming from the ground up. This is coming from research from students all across the country that are telling you, this is what impacts us. This is the news that impacts our communities. And it's really a beautiful thing to see all of this research pulled together in such a huge project and come to fruition every year in such an amazing, impactful book. And it was easy for me working at RT because I just took the book and kind of put it in a TV form, and it was a great resource to have. And I just thank everyone so much for coming out and supporting this organization. It's insanely crucial, and really everyone needs to donate to keep this alive, because this is the most important thing we have in this country right now. So is it just me, or have you guys heard a lot about Russia lately? So as someone who's been called a Russian agent a lot, wow, really scary times we're living in, and a lot of you grew up during the Cold War, so I know that this is not a joke. There's a lot of really intense rhetoric going on, and I wanted to start off this conversation tonight just by dissecting a little bit of it, especially coming from RT, being called a Russian state propagandist for so long, when really understanding how Russian media works, and it's a lot a lot different than it's projected, this cartoonish depiction of Putin sitting us down at a round table and telling us what to say every week. Really, I kind of steamrolled my editors and producers and was able to do a lot and pave a lot of editorial freedom. And I think it shows you that a lot of the people that we see on the news today, it's not like there's some grand conspiracy, top-down, people who've watched Outfoxed. Yes, they get notes and stuff sometimes, but really these people believe in American exceptionalism. They believe in this new Cold War reset. And it's kind of exemplified with a couple emails that I got in the last few weeks. BBC, I got an interesting email from them saying, I'm looking into links between far-left, far-right activist movements in the US and the Russian government. Slightly hazy at the moment, but I can say that I've seen some evidence of groups or people potentially being funded by the Russian government. His evidence was just that someone who worked at RT used to be into Black Lives Matter and now supports Trump. So it's these far-reaching, things that are coming from the establishment press, really reaching there, saying that Putin himself is actually directing people working within Russian media to support and promote Trump. I mean, that's batshit crazy. And then Media Matters, which I was actually surprised about. They reached out to me wanting to comment, and I was like, oh, yeah, of course I'll give you a comment on Russian media, and let's talk about it. And I was really alarmed to see that the response, kind of the same thing as BBC. Just asking you as a former RT employee, what do you think of Donald Trump's ties to Russia? How do they work together? How does Putin and Donald Trump work together? I was like, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about, and you should actually be ashamed of yourself, because I thought really highly of your organization, and I'm alarmed that you're actually coming at me with this. Then I had an interesting phone call with Samantha Bee's producer, who's this liberal bastion on Comedy Central, kind of a Democratic apologist, and also just totally fell prey to this Russian propaganda, anti-Russian propaganda rather. He called me saying he wanted to talk to me about Kremlin propaganda. I thought that it was going to be a little bit, more critical than that, not as black and white, but sure enough, it was just coming at me full force saying, tell me about the intricacies of how Putin's top-down media machine works. And I was just like, what is happening here? I mean, how is it possible that all of you actually believe that this is how it works, And I kept trying to flip the table and say, why don't you talk about your media? Like, look at the media in the US. And he came back at me. It was kind of a heated conversation, actually, for a while. arguing with this guy, but telling him, hey, you should reflect, our dysfunctional society, our inequality, and he was just like, well, in Russia, Putin tells them what to say from the top down. I was like, well, it doesn't even matter because we have, 6 corporations controlling 90% of what we see, hear, and read. And you might as well be, it's actually scarier when you have non-state media parroting the establishment, unquestioningly selling war, and just acquiescing over and over again. I mean, that to me is actually scarier. I would actually be more comfortable if it was actually U.S. state media. So we should all be asking I just think that everyone should take a step back with this rhetoric, and it's coming at us from all sides right now, and it's really scary, you guys. And take it from me, there is no conspiracy at the Russian. Pretty much everyone there supports Hillary. All right, so let's end that right there. But no, it's very unfounded. We're hearing right now that Russia is interfering with our elections. Does everyone remember in 2014 when the U.S. government squarely, actually, and I think there was some retaliation, said that North Korea hacked Sony in retaliation for the interview? Do you guys remember that? Yeah. That turned out to be complete bullshit. All right, it was an insider from Sony trying to embarrass the CEOs there or whatever. Was there ever an apology? Was there ever a press conference? Was there ever anything in the establishment press saying, you know what, that wasn't North Korea, that was Sony executives, we're sorry about that? So I think that when we're hearing that Russia's hacking our elections and it's this insane detraction from, the rigging of the actual election, and we'll talk about that word and how it's been hijacked too, but I think that we should all take a step back and just remember that we've been lied to over and over and over again. And when the establishment's on a beat, we have to ask why. I wanted to turn it over to Mark first, and this is an amazing panel, by the way. Everyone, if you don't know who these people are, definitely get into their work. Mark, incredible to have you here. New York University professor, media studies, incredible inspiration to me. Mark, you grew up during the Cold War, and you've been a media analyst for a long time, and I wanted your insight on why you think this is pumping up now, because it's not like we're fighting a communist state anymore. It's an oligarchic capitalist state.
Well, it is mind-boggling. I mean, I've been studying the media as a critic since the late 70s, right? And as you know, I grew up during the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And I can't say I've ever seen anything like what we're living through now, for the mind-boggling mendacity of the stories we're hearing. I mean, absolute fantasies flung at us as gospel truth, for the stridency of the propaganda, and for the unanimity of the propaganda. And by that I mean not only that the corporate press seems to be univocal, everybody basically reading from the same script, but also for the fact that the entertainment media and the so-called left press often re-echoes what we're getting from the mainstream. You can get the same vision of Putin, for example, as a kind of reincarnation of Stalin, mm-hmm. from House of Cards, in its worst season, second season, and from Saturday Night Live, yeah. Right? They play it for laughs. That you get from the so-called liberal media, and then it's variously re-echoed, by Amy Goodman and others. It's deeply troubling and extremely dangerous, to say the least. I wanted to thank you. Thank you for applauding that sentiment. I want to read something. So I had a feeling you were going to ask me about this. This is a very sobering passage from the Berlin Diary by the great CBS newsman William Shirer. When he was over in Berlin from 34 to 41, he kept this diary clandestinely, kind of like Winston Smith, in 1984, and he smuggled it home with him, and it became a big bestseller. And I don't know, this would probably strike some people as provocative, but I have a feeling that in this room, where I feel unusually at home and remarkably relieved to be here, I think that you'll take the point. This is from August 10th, 1939. How completely isolated a world the German people live in. A glance at the newspapers yesterday and today reminds you of it. Whereas all the rest of the world considers that the peace is about to be broken by Germany, that it is Germany that is threatening to attack Poland over Danzig, here in Germany, in the world the local newspapers create, the very reverse is being maintained. Not that it surprises me, but when you're away for a while, you forget. What the Nazi papers are proclaiming is this, that it is Poland which is disturbing the peace of Europe. Poland which is threatening Germany with armed invasion, and so forth. This is the Germany of last September when the steam was turned on Czechoslovakia. Poland, look out, warns the BZ headline, adding, answer to Poland, the runner amok against peace and right in Europe. Or the headline in Der Führer, daily paper of Karlsruhe, which I brought on the train. Warsaw threatens bombardment of Danzig. Unbelievable agitation of the Polish arch madness. For perverse perversion of the truth, this is good. You ask, but the German people can't possibly believe these lies. Then you talk to them. So many do. Okay? Now, I think this is exactly like what we're getting now, right? You've got a coup in Ukraine, demonstrably quarterbacked by Hillary Clinton's State Department. We have the evidence. It's clear, right? We know this is a fact because the conversation between Victoria Nuland at the State Department and Jeffrey Pyatt, the U.S. ambassador to Kiev, is explicit. They are managing the coup. They're picking out those Ukrainian politicians who are going to comprise the next government, right? This is reported in the New York Times as evidence of Russian hacking. That's the way they cover the story. And the response from the White House is they're very concerned that the Russians would take this liberty. Nothing about the content, does it sound familiar, right? Nothing about the content of the material. Then, a politician in Estonia, there's another hacked phone conversation, tells Catherine Ashton of the EU about the fact that many people in Ukraine believe that the massacre by snipers of people in Maidan Square was actually the work of the coup plotters, not the work of the corrupt president's police. So this wasn't even mentioned in the New York Times or anywhere else. This is explicit evidence that the United States is the aggressor in Ukraine, that we started it, that this is part of the general encirclement, right, of Russia by NATO, right? We're all over the... Nevertheless, what we get in the United States press is exactly the opposite. That, Putin is invading Ukraine. No, Putin has invaded Ukraine. There's been an invasion of Ukraine. You all remember this invasion of Ukraine, right? Big invasion of Ukraine. Evidence came forward, pictorial evidence, photographic evidence, all of it exposed outside the pages of the New York Times, etc., as fake. It was all bogus. The sky is crammed with military drones. You'd think they'd find a photograph of this invasion of Ukraine, right? Which hasn't taken place. It never happened. The same with the seizure of Crimea. I could go on. I could go on. The fact is that on the basis of decades and decades of anti-Soviet propaganda, right, which builds up in the minds of millions of Americans as a kind of sediment, on that foundation, then, the government and the press together push this new image of Putin as a dangerously expansive Soviet Russian dictator, a strong man, right? A guy who murders journalists, right? We hear this over and over and over again, and the frightening thing is that so many people, so many educated people, so many liberal Democrats, just like the biggest dullards walking around the United States in 1953, the most credulous members of Joe McCarthy's audience, there is no difference. Everybody believes it 100%. That's frightening, okay? That is an example, that's just one example of the many ways in which the problem that Project Censored deals with poses a serious threat to our welfare. Right? Every horrible thing that's going on now is arguably the result of the failure of our press to do its duty under the First Amendment. Whether it's this freak show of a presidential race, the total corruption of our voting system, whether it's the daily summary execution of American citizens by our police, whether it's the prison industrial complex that we see around us, the longest prison strike in American history has been going on for a month. It never gets any coverage whatsoever. Whether it's the ongoing public health catastrophe of the MMR vaccine, okay? That may strike some people in here as a crackpot notion. That response is also based on yet another staggeringly successful propaganda drive by our free press, right? And as you say, Abby, it's absolutely true. The propaganda is all the more effective for the fact that we appear to have a free media system independent of the government, that it is not state-controlled. We hear this endlessly. There's the Russian state-controlled media, the Chinese state-controlled media, Venezuela, Iran. It's state-controlled, not like us, okay? But see, propaganda always works particularly well. It's at its most effective when it comes at you as something other than propaganda. See? That's a fact. So RT, it doesn't make any secret of its connection to the Russian government. It's overt. And for that very reason, I think, its people tend to function more professionally as journalists than these abysmal hacks who work, throughout the American press, which represents itself as free, as independent, okay? Well, if that's an example of an independent press, then we're all completely, as children present, we're screwed. You know what I'm saying? We're absolutely screwed.
I'm going to jump in here, and I think that I'm going to move it over to David, because, David, you've researched the CIA so extensively. What is your response when you see Hillary standing up there and, like Mark was saying, deflecting from the content of the leaks and just continuing to say, how dare Russia usurp our elections, undermine our democracy, steer this whole country? It's like, man, how many times has the CIA interfered in other countries' governments and elections?
Yeah, it's the height of hypocrisy. Well, I agree with much of what has been said here. I must say, though, that I, as an independent journalist, wouldn't really like working in Putin's Russia or Ukraine either. I have a friend who runs a Ukrainian publication, and 2 of her lovers and partners have been assassinated in Ukraine. There's lots of intrigue, political intrigue and violence there. But I do believe that RT in this country plays a very useful role, because I agree with Mark that our own media system, is so heavily propagandized and corporate controlled and gets more and more carnival-like every day, that it's basically useless at this point as a vehicle for useful civic information. But I don't want to give the impression that I think other countries have more open, systems of journalism. And I would certainly also have deep problems with most countries. I think that obviously the national security state is our religion. We live in a country that's been at permanent war throughout my life. That begins to eat away, rot away at the soul of a democracy. There's no way that you can have an empire and a permanent state of war and have a viable democracy. So we're now in a situation where we have a campaign that doesn't ever discuss the elephant in the room, that we don't ever discuss peace and war anymore. When I was young, when I was the age of the students here, we were in the streets all the time. We had an anti-war movement. We had media that actually was forced to cover the anti-war movement because the protests were large and very disruptive. We lost, but we won. It was complicated. But certainly today we don't have oppositional movement that way that raises the questions about, should this country still be involved in the Middle East? Should we still have boots on the ground invading Mosul? We're invading Mosul again. Don't you feel you're in Groundhog Day in this country? It's unbelievable. And yet I don't see the outrage there. And yes, partly and to a great extent, it's the fault of our media that's bought and paid for. I see people that I helped train at Salon who are now on CNN, Jake Tapper and others, and they're just part of the same tapestry, you know? And you get to be kind of, frankly, fatalistic at some point and go, you know, where are the conscience of these journalists? And why aren't they challenging authority more aggressively? But what it comes down to, and what it's always comes down to, is like the old motto that Scoop Nisker, the great hippie journalist from the 60s and 70s up till the current day in the Bay Area. He had this saying that he signed off with on radio: if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. And my feeling always as a journalist, from the time I was in high school, creating a student journal that got me thrown out of my high school, was we've got to create our own media. Because once you go inside the belly of that beast, there's no way to do viable work for any extended period of time that challenges authority, that challenges conventional wisdom without being punished and sidelined. I was just on stage with Chris Hedges, the great Chris Hedges in Berkeley the other night. And of course, Chris was in the belly of the beast for years at the New York Times and did terrific work as a foreign correspondent and challenged Israel and challenged the State Department again and again on his reporting in the Middle East and the Balkans. But Chris ultimately did have to make a decision to leave because his life was becoming unviable at the New York Times. And so the challenge is, can we create the alternate institutions that reach people, that have an effect, that become part of the national dialogue? I started Salon for that reason, and we did for a while. I think had a run at that because we had original journalism that was running counter to the mainstream sort of narrative, and we challenged that. We paid for investigative journalism. And then what happened was Arianna Huffington business model took over. Hey, I'm not going to pay anything for anybody, and I'm going to become a millionaire. And she did. And that business model won out. And then clickbait took over instead of deep investigative journalism. And so now I look at this kind of thing that I helped create, the digital news culture, and I'm really deeply dismayed, except for pockets like us here and there, people doing the work. But to really be in the mix, you have to build a professional newsroom. You have to build a newsroom where there's journalists who are trained, who are experienced, who are capable of going out and doing the legwork and the investigative work and pulling the documents and, frankly, working with hackers. Because as Chris said, there are no leakers anymore in government. They're so closely monitored. We live in such a repressive state at this point that whistleblowers can't even do what they want to do, their patriotic duty, without being busted by the government. They're constantly being surveilled and monitored. The lid is so tight now. So we need people like Julian Assange, and this blowback against Assange is very dangerous. And how the left has bought into it and has vilified him, because he and the hacker culture is the only thing standing between us and complete ignorance about the way that power really works. So 2 things I'll leave you with, and I'm done for now, is yes, we have to build our own media, and we have to continue to encourage and support the hacker culture, because there is no democracy at this point without that free flow of information.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it disturbs me greatly that his internet was shut off, and wow, that's insane. I mean, that's a human right. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen next, and it's really sad if the Ecuadorian government kowtowed to the empire on that one. Trying to ask my bosses about that. Tell us more. Mnar, I want to turn to you because you have a really interesting story. Similarly to me, you have been viciously attacked in the establishment press because you have been at the forefront of cutting through the Syrian war propaganda push. 2 years ago, the Ghouta chemical weapons attack, even Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who wrote the anthrax speech for Colin Powell at the UN, told me that it's completely unfounded, and everyone in the intelligence community knows that it was not Assad that carried out that attack. Mnar was on the front lines with that story and came under insane heat for publishing it. Mnar, first I wanted you to talk about that story and also talk about, you've been covering the propaganda since, and this is one of the hotbeds of propaganda right now, where it's extremely hard to sort through the deluge every day coming at us. So talk a little bit about what happened to you and what's been happening since in the country. Oh, sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for being here today, and I'm absolutely honored to be sitting among some amazing journalists here and professors and media literacy experts. I'm sure many of you have heard the fight for Aleppo, the fight for now Mosul, the fight for Kirkuk, and the fight for, I would say, Ghouta, the Ghouta chemical attacks. And I really would like to piggyback on the point that David just made that we need journalists to be on the front lines to really challenge the government narratives that promote and justify wars. Well, MintPress was on the front line of that propaganda to challenge the narratives of war when it came to Syria. When the Ghouta chemical weapons attack took place, we had a journalist on the ground, actually 2 journalists on the ground, by the name of Dale Gavlak and Yahya Ababne. And immediately, 2 days after the Obama administration had said that that Assad had crossed the red line and had committed basically a chemical weapons attack against his own people, that he was gassing his own people. Our reporters on the ground actually interviewed people, Syrians in Ghouta. They interviewed rebels themselves that were part of al-Nusra front, who were occupying many parts of Ghouta. And they had spoken to these people on the ground, and they were at the heart of this story. 2 days after President Obama had made this announcement that Assad had gassed his own people, he had crossed that red line, and that we, the United States, were going to take war action in Syria. And we're ready to start airstriking to get rid of the Assad government. And our reporters spoke to these people on the ground, and what they told us completely changed the course of history and the war narrative inside Syria. We spoke to people on the ground, and they had told us that the rebels, very specifically the al-Nusra front, were being provided chemical weapons capabilities from the Saudi Arabian government and the Turkish government. And of course, when we published this report, the story, of course, went completely viral within just a couple of minutes. Our website had crashed because we were getting over 100,000 unique visitors every 3 minutes to our site. And we had to ask antiwar.com to host the story on their website. And of course, all the traffic had gone to their website. And we were kind of panicking and trying to figure out how we can get our website back up. But there we were, a very small, independent, 6-month-old news watchdog journalism organization in Minneapolis, Minnesota, led by me, a 25-year-old Muslim Palestinian American journalist, the first of its kind. And thank you. And we had done what no other news agency in the United States had done, which was to challenge that narrative of war. And what we saw happen when that story went viral was so amazing, because the fact that we were getting so much traffic from not just the United States, but all around the world, and it was being talked about on every media channel or organization across the globe, except, of course, the major news organizations here in the United States, was a huge sign that people didn't want another war. People were so tired of the propaganda. They were so tired of the lies that we were being fed to justify that war. And so it was a very, very amazing feeling. But 2 days after we published this story, our reporter who wrote the story and translated the story, Dale Gavlak, had received a phone call from the Associated Press, who she had also worked with. She was a stringer. She freelanced for MintPress, and she freelanced also for the Associated Press. And they had called her and said, "What are you doing putting your name on this story? You need to get your name off of this story." And I don't think they told her the reason why, but she immediately called us and said, "I believe that the Saudis themselves have contacted the Associated Press and have demanded that they get away from this story," because in her byline, it had said that she worked for the Associated Press, which gave the story a little bit more clout since we were a very new journalism startup. And she immediately said, "There's no way I'm going to remove my name. Like, this is our story. We did this, and I'm proud of it, and, we don't want to be a part of the next war." Literally an hour later, I got a phone call from Dale trembling in fear. She had received another phone call from the Associated Press saying that if she did not remove her name off of the story, that they would end her career and she would be done. And of course, we didn't know what to do with this. I was a new editor and we were a very small staff and we didn't really know what we were doing. All we knew is that we had stopped the first war from happening. But just a couple of weeks after this story had gone viral, Dale Gavlek came under the pressure and she retracted her involvement in the story. And of course, I came out and made public statements that yes, she wrote the story and so forth. But immediately to discredit the story, the media establishment here in the United States, from the BuzzFeeds and several other so-called leftist news organizations that were parroting these war narratives to justify the war in Syria, came and attacked me directly. And of course, it was nothing more than an assassination, a character assassination. And they used the fact that I was young. I was a 25-year-old woman. They used the fact that I was a woman. They used the fact that I was Muslim. I wore hijab. All of these things against me to try to distract from the true contents of the story and smear me and MintPress as this Assad front in the United States and this Russian, agency that was being funded by Putin. So it was very similar to what Abby had gone through. But the story of the Ghouta chemical weapons attack is still an ongoing story. And I'm not talking about just with Ghouta, but I'm talking about the narrative of that war in Syria to get more US involvement into that region continues, and it keeps transforming. And it does feel like Groundhog's Day almost every couple of weeks. The story moved from Ghouta, then it moved to fighting ISIS, and then it moved to recapturing Aleppo. And something that we need to remember about Aleppo, which is what is so important here, is that Aleppo is not one city. Aleppo has been split up into two. And the media has really painted the story of Aleppo as besieged and is basically the Russian government and the Assad government are raining down bombs on innocent civilians. And now we have the white helmets who work very closely with al-Qaeda and al-Nusra front inside Aleppo, who are actually being funded by USAID and other British organizations to kind of control the narrative about Syria. Aleppo, the story of Aleppo that we're not being told is that eastern Aleppo is only 200,000 people. It's occupied by over about 200,000 people. The rest of the people have actually fled. They fled because al-Nusra front and al-Qaeda, who are now openly receiving funding and arms from the US government, have taken over the city and have actually besieged the city. And that's the story behind Aleppo that we've been challenging. And of course, we have been continuing to challenge the war against Syria, and these attacks by the media continue. And the more we talk about Syria, the more we are vindicated, of course, by the Hillary emails and how the CIA was on the ground in Syria, fomenting unrest there and arming rebels and creating the sectarian civil strife there.
Mark, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on that story about the AP's threat to professionally assassinate your colleague, and I want to use that to respond to your just point about the real physical danger that reporters are in places like Ukraine. I think it's important for us to recognize that in order to protect propaganda narratives on which a tremendous amount of money depends, the state and its enablers in the press very often will go to almost any lengths. Now, I wish I could say that in the United States, journalists are never at physical risk the way they are in places like Ukraine or Iran or other places like that. But we know from the story of Michael Hastings and many other reporters, all too many other reporters, going all the way back to Dorothy Kilgallen and Charles Horman in Chile and Danny Casolaro, Gary Webb, whose story is a little bit different, but all too similar. I mean, it can be, existentially dangerous to reporters to go too far in exposing the falseness of an important narrative. But for the most part, it doesn't work that way. It works through the use of an extremely effective propaganda meme that we'll be talking about tomorrow at the panel with the great Lance DeHaven Smith, and that is the conspiracy theory meme. If anyone dares to raise any questions about these all-important narratives on which billions of dollars depend, they are finished professionally. They will be tagged conspiracy theorists, and as I say tomorrow, we'll be talking about precisely how the CIA managed to make that happen, because the agency was actually behind the spread of that meme throughout US journalistic discourse, specifically in the late 60s, in order to protect the propaganda narrative of the Warren Commission report. It was people like Mark Lane and Edward J. Epstein were raising questions. You write about this, about that report, completely legitimate questions that to this day are controversial in the mainstream press. The agency came up with the brilliant idea of getting its propaganda assets and friends in the media to demonstrate that these were conspiracy theorists, cranks, and that their assets should use the following 5 arguments to discredit this work. And these are arguments that are still being used today, So the problem is compounded by in other words, the problem of the state's ruthless protection of these propaganda narratives is now compounded by the fact that we have the internet, we have MintPress News, we have RT, Telesur available online. We had Salon and so on. The Intercept, exactly. Counterpunch, right? Mm-hmm. This makes the task of protecting these propaganda narratives basically impossible. And I can say, I'm not known for my cheerier sentiments, but I have to say that it is tremendously hopeful as far as I'm concerned that we now live in a media culture where it's possible instantaneously to get the other side of the story, and this has had a dramatic effect on the attitudes of young people, right? We've heard some terrific students here tonight. I can attest from my own experience in the classroom that students are noticeably less intimidated by the conspiracy theory meme than they used to be, because it's so easy now to get the truth, This, I think, in part accounts for that bizarre and often terrifying stridency with which the press is now attacking people like us. Abby knows, and some of the other people in this room know, that Vice is actually trying to get me fired from my job at NYU because of my affiliation with the 9/11 Truth Movement. This is a story I can tell at some other time. It's pretty funny, actually. Oh, that I'm going to be fired? No. Okay.
That's cold.
That's really cold. I don't know what I did to you to deserve that. At any rate, the point is that telling the truth is always difficult, right? Ask Socrates. It's always difficult. It's extremely difficult in conditions of empire. And it's extremely difficult in conditions of empire threatened, which is basically what we have today.
Abby, can I just...
Sure,
Thanks.
sure.
I just wanted to, because I didn't fully answer your question earlier about CIA manipulation of the media. And so, yeah, this clearly continues. I wrote about it in my latest book, going back to the Cold War days, and Mark alluded to some of that. I found after the Warren Commission released its report on the JFK assassination, Alan Dulles, conveniently, the former head of the CIA who had been fired by Kennedy, was sitting on the Warren Commission. And Newsweek, the head of the Washington Bureau of Newsweek, I found correspondence in Alan Dulles' own papers at Princeton. The head of the Washington Washington Bureau of Newsweek went to Dulles and said, would you please basically vet what we're doing here when the Warren Report comes out? Will you read what we're writing about it here, the coverage, because we're under tight deadline and we need your expert opinion. So basically they gave, before in advance of publication, their coverage of the Warren Report to Alan Dulles, a person who had a dog in that fight, let's say, to look at. And then the guy writes to him afterwards, thank you, Mr. Dulles. We could never have done it under deadline without you basically editing and reviewing our coverage of the Warren Report. So that continues to today. I have a book that I published by the great Nicholas Scow, who's an investigative reporter who wrote about Gary Webb, in fact, in Kill the Messenger, which was made into a great movie that no one saw, strangely. It was dumped by Hollywood, Focus Features. And it's a terrific film, though, and you should all see it and read the book. But his new book for Hot Books, my imprint, is called Spooked, and it goes into great detail about how the CIA continues to this day manipulate the media. The media has become even more craven in some ways now because media has been downsized. There are fewer and fewer jobs. Those jobs that still are, particularly the elite jobs for the leading newspapers that have the resources to cover national security, are in big demand. And the only way that you keep those jobs is if you play ball with Langley. I mean, everyone knows that. So Nick goes into great detail. He got some national security reporters from the Times and other places to actually give him honest interviews. It's very interesting. And of course, Hollywood now is a big part of this equation. So whether it's series like Homeland or movies like Zero Dark 30, there's great and intense cooperation between Hollywood producers and the CIA and all this. And then the final response I wanted to say to another question: why is this happening now, Abby? That the new Cold War, the new hysteria about Russia. I think it's because we were allowed to remake the Middle East along the neocon lines that had been planned for years by PNAC, that group, and basically the plan for Iraq, for Afghanistan, and Libya was all put into effect. The last, bowling pin standing was Syria, and Russia got involved there. And that frustrated, the ambitions to complete the map in the sort of neocon vision that Bush and others and Cheney had in mind and continued throughout the Obama administration. And so when Russia got in our way in Syria, that's when all hell started to break loose. That's when they were truly demonized.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Hillary's continued call for a no-fly zone is extremely dangerous, and she keeps doubling down on it. At this point, it's batshit crazy because it actually means a direct confrontation, not only with Syria, but with Russia. They have bases in Syria. We have bases in, 700 bases around the world. That was one of the Project Censored story this year is 70% of nations. I mean, it's absolutely insane, the reach of the U.S. empire, and to deflect this to Russia is pretty astounding. And Hillary continues to double down on this point that would cause mass civilian casualties. She even said it herself to private banking CEOs that it would kill lots of Syrians. So that's her private position.
I just wanted to add a point about the smears and the attacks that go against journalists that we undergo. Censorship doesn't just come in the form of a story not being covered. It also comes in the form of these attacks, these continuous attacks against journalists that we saw with our reporter, Dale Gavlak, with the ridiculous smears that took place against our reporter, Yahya Ababne, and the continuous caricature that has been crafted about MintPress as this Assad agency or this Russian agency, this Iranian agency in the United States. These kinds of smears are created and they are perpetrated because they want us as reporters to stop doing what we're doing. They want to silence us. We're seeing that now with Julian Assange. He's being painted as this Russian agent, and he's promoting Trump, even though he's helping expose our rigged electoral system. So I was really, really, really excited to find out about Project Censored because for so long I had, at the time when I was first attacked by BuzzFeed, who The writer of the article, of course, is a notorious neocon who's tied to the State Department and tied to actually PNAC, Rosie Gray. We all know Rosie Gray. But when I was first attacked through this character assassination, it felt really, really lonely. I had some of my own staff turn against me because they were worried. I mean, they're from Minnesota, suburban Minnesota. They were worried. This was the most exciting thing and the scariest thing that they had probably ever dealt with. But they were worried about their reputation. And I think that for a lot of journalists who are in it for the name, who are in it for, you know, as a career journalist, they're worried about their reputation. And so I lost a lot of friends. I had people from leftist medias email me, specifically from Occupy Wall Street and from others I won't name, who said to me, you know, Mnar, we read those articles about you and we're just not too comfortable working with you anymore. And, you know, just no hard feelings. And you know, I almost want to cry because I really felt so alone for so long. And then with the constant, you know, media propaganda that was being perpetrated against Muslims constantly, it just feels like, you know, you don't have allies in the system. And of course, I met Abby right away, and she was really excited to share our story and hear about what we had gone through. And then through Abby, I actually met Mickey. And so I really, really am touched by everybody that's here today and by these groups of people and by what Project Censored is doing. It really, you know, when I saw, you know, what I had written in Project Censored, I honestly was brought to tears because for years, for 3 years, we were continuously being smeared and attacked by the very people that we thought were on our side, and they weren't on our side. They were in journalism for the name, for the reputation. They weren't in it for the real mission. And that's why I always advocate for an alternative to the alternative media, which is what MintPress is trying to do. So thank you so much.
I know how that loneliness feels when Lawrence O'Donnell is calling you a conspiracy theorist with Jamie fucking Kirchick on TV, this rat who's like the troll who runs around and tries to shape all these narratives. He's also an FBI member, which is the spawn of PNAC. And once you learn all these players, you start to kind of get emboldened. You know, being called a truther, conspiracy theorist, and a Russian agent. Kind of take it as a badge of honor at this point. You should be proud because you know they have nothing else to go on, and they can't attack any facts that you say, and that's insane. So I wanted to talk about
But they have endless resources, which we don't, unfortunately.
Yeah, of course. And you know, Mnar made a really good point about the intent of a lot of journalists in the establishment is they are in it for the career. It is an establishment kind of hackery when a lot of the journalists that I talk to are totally outside of the system because it's from their heart. You know, it's hard to sell yourself out and take that route because you know how many conflicts of interest, how much advertising is going to be pushed and shoved down your throat, and you're not going to be able to do the work that you know you need to if you really want to be a real journalist. So many of them are never promoted or uplifted, and that's what Project Censored really does, and so happy to have you guys all here. I wanted to talk about the dog and pony show of our elections right now and about the Podesta emails that are coming out because, like David said, I mean, this is, you know, hackers have kind of become our news source, the raw source, because whistleblowers are punished, of course, even more under Obama. And I think it's fascinating how little, I mean, I was looking up the Podesta emails, and other than a couple people who are actually searching them themselves and posting clips on Twitter and stuff like that, it's so hard to find any progressive or leftist outlets that are covering them at all. Like literally only Breitbart and a couple other just like alt-right blogs and stuff are picking up on these. And so of course the vast majority of people are going to say, oh, I don't trust those sources. This is all biased. The leaks are fake. You have Donna Brazil actually making that audacious claim, completely unfounded. And you know, and also this rigging of the election thing, how people are mocking Trump for saying that. I think it's very funny, and Mark could speak to this because, you know, everyone said the election was rigged this whole time. I mean, the whole system's rigged. What do you mean the election's rigged? Everything's rigged. That's why we have Trump and Clinton to choose from. So I find it really interesting that these terms You know, when pressed, all the cynical punditry sitting in their ivory towers are saying there's nothing newsworthy in these leaks. Yeah. Well, maybe for you assholes there aren't, but for us, it's shocking. I mean, this is all pay-to-play insider baseball stuff where you're finding out that people are getting questions in advance. The Clinton Foundation, they're giving favors to the Dubai king. I mean, all of this stuff is out there. And it's very shocking. I wanted to get your guys's, Mark, I wanted to talk to you about just kind of the rigging mockery, you know, especially since that's one of the stories in Project Censored is the algorithmic shaping of our views online, the Google searches, what are we actually getting? And also the voting, not the voting fraud, of course, that's a fake issue, but the election fraud. And I wanted each of you to just comment on, you know, this whole thing that Trump almost seems like he is an outsider, that he's this anti-establishment candidate because no one's covering, I mean, the Clinton machine is at full force. The media is 100% on board with Clinton, and it makes him almost seem like this outsider.
Well, yeah, I mean, it almost does. Of course, he's, you know, I mean, he's been an insider for years.
As much as a billionaire can be, yeah.
Right. Well, right. And of course, you know, the Clintons asked for money from him. I mean, we know all this stuff. I mean, well, we don't all know it. A few of us know it. Their daughters are best friends, right? I mean, they're just a wonderful bunch of human beings. You know, can we just hear it for them, please? Let's just, thank you. Yes, for the Trumps, the Clintons. Yeah, really, I hope nobody ate before coming in here. Well, Trump performs a very interesting sort of service, and whether he's witting or not, who knows? It's impossible to tell, because he's such a volatile, thin-skinned sociopath. You know, it's hard to imagine him having the discipline to do a kind of deliberate thing. So whether he's been manipulated into it or not, he is performing an invaluable kind of disinformation function. We call it poisoning the well. If he says it, it has to be false, right? So he's been defined as absolutely and always lying. It's kind of the way, you know, decades of anti-Soviet propaganda represented communism. You know, communist propaganda, all propaganda was communist, and it was always false, it was always lies. Everything Trump says is false. Hillary will say after one of his extended riffs at a debate, well, everything that Donald just said is false. Well, actually, often that wasn't true. That was false because some of the things he said were false, right? But mixing them together in that way, you know, enables us all then to brush off everything he said when, in fact, he was absolutely right to say there's no evidence that Russia hacked the DNC emails. That's actually true. And Hillary's response to that was false. And when he says that the system is rigged, there is a very important grain of truth in that because we've had several elections stolen, not by Russia, right? He's wrong in the way he thinks that it's going to be stolen because he keeps talking about voter fraud, which is a Republican meme that goes back to 2000 and has been used to get these voter IDs laws passed in order to disenfranchise more Democrats. Nevertheless, there's a very important element of truth there that now the entire political establishment and all the press, all the way over to the left, are all strenuously hollering is simply, completely groundless, that our elections cannot be hacked or rigged. It can't happen unless Russia does it. Okay, Russia might do it. Okay, they might do it because Putin. He's going to steal our election. He's going to murder our journalists. He's going to rape our women. He's going to kill our buffalo. You know, all that stuff that Putin does because Putin is horrible. Putin is like Hitler, as Hillary has told us, right? So the essential fact is the one that you mentioned, Abby, that there's tremendous amounts of election fraud and vote suppression that go on, that both parties allow it to happen and carry it out, and it was just used to deprive the only legitimately popular candidate in this last election season of the nomination, and that was Bernie Sanders, right? He was, without a doubt, demonstrably the people's choice. He would have wiped up the floor with Donald Trump, okay? Well, they couldn't let that happen because the propaganda narrative they want to sell is it's got to be Hillary. We need neoliberalism to continue. We need to have our first female president in place in order to keep pursuing the Bush-Cheney agenda, only making it much worse. The same way we've had our first African-American president do this, because it will put most Democrats and liberals sound asleep. They'll give him a pass. He can do this. He can start 5 more wars. He can crack down on civil liberties to an unprecedented extent and use the Espionage Act 6 times against whistleblowers, right? And he can, get his food policy from Monsanto. Well, Michelle has the organic vegetable garden. And, he can do all this stuff. And because he is an articulate, intelligent, African-American Democrat, notionally liberal, it's okay that he does this stuff because he's not a yahoo like Bush, right? Or an ape like Trump, right? So, I think the propaganda narrative is that one, that we have these progressive, diverse presidents who carry out these horrible, horrible programs, right? So for these emails to come out and to give us a look into the kitchen where this disgusting meal is prepared for us, they don't want to go there. They want to talk about that because all the truth is there. It's completely fixed.
I just want to say one way that clearly things have been rigged against Trump. He was a ticking time bomb for, throughout the whole campaign. But they exploited that. He was a carnival act, and the ratings soared. I mean, it was great TV. So the media and, the head of CBS famously said, Trump is great for ratings. But when they realized this clown could actually win, and he was dangerous because he was so reckless, God knows what he would do in the White House, they had all this sex shit on him, ready to go. I mean, we know how that's played. I was in the middle of that during the Clinton impeachment with Salon. So this is how we get things done. That's how the elites get things done in American, electoral sort of battleground. It's sex. All the things that guy said and did about Muslims, about Mexicans, everything, but none of that really could bring him down until they had that tape. And of course, he had to be saying this shit on the bus with stupid Billy Bush. But because video is the sort of, that's it in America. It's, you live and die by the visual image. So, but look, that was planned. Clearly, Trump's right. They had it ready to go. They let it blow up right before the debate, and it was incredibly effective. So that's the way they played it. But I mean, there again, how insane is this that we have a situation where the liberal elites in this country, and again, Chris Hedges is very articulate about this, have allowed the system to deteriorate to such an extent. The Democratic Party has abandoned the working class, has abandoned the labor movement, has abandoned the deplorables, as Hillary affectionately called them, in this country, and has allowed a quite significant part of the American population, given how hollowed out American industry and the economy is, to fall into the hands of these dangerous charlatans. And so this guy obviously was too buffoonish to make it all the way. But think about a Trump who's more sophisticated in the future, because they're coming. They're on the way. And they'll be much more shrewd and effective next time around, and then we're really going to have to be concerned. America has now a situation where we need scapegoats, we need victims, we need what Noam Chomsky calls non-people, unpeople, to destroy, to exploit and destroy. And it's Muslims suddenly, in the last 15 years, okay, we're going to pick this part of the world. When I was young, Vietnam was suddenly going to invade our country. Gee, that didn't happen, did they? They got integrated somehow into the global economic system. Everyone's fine with Vietnam now. It's a bizarre and sick and toxic culture and system that we live under. It needs to demonize certain populations in order to give us a rationale for continuing our war machine. The war, it's no longer just the military-industrial complex. We are the military-industrial complex. Everything in American society has become militarized. When Colin Kaepernick stood up and challenged the national anthem, all hell broke loose, right? Because we just went along with all that. We would go to sporting events, and now it's not just one anthem you have to stand for. You have to stand in baseball games, the 7th inning for America the Beautiful. You have to watch flyovers, the military flyovers. You have to watch our troops being honored. We don't honor our troops. We throw them away after they're used. And we go to the hot dog stand, and they're showing us ads for the Army. Sign up. It is creepy and Orwellian. And we're like frogs in the boiling water that we haven't realized this. We've raised our children now with these militarized videos, with militarized sports. Everything is militarized. You should read a book by Barbara Ehrenreich's daughter, Rosa Brooks, an amazing and really, I think, disturbing book. She is the daughter of socialists, famous socialists, authors and professor, John Ehrenreich and Barbara Ehrenreich. And she wrote a book. She became a lawyer for the Pentagon during the Clinton and Bush administrations. And she, at different points in her career, actually had to sit in on the drone assassination meetings. Who are we going to kill? Her professor from Yale, who was her mentor, was also involved in those. And he said to her, I'm looking at pictures of young people your age, college-age students, like I'm looking at the applicants for Yale Law School. They're the same age, except these are people we're going to kill. Young Muslims overseas who have decided to resist this overpowering war machine and are now being targeted, and they don't even have all the information for them. They're signature strikes, many of these. They kind of think they're guilty, but we'll never know for sure. And this is Barbara Ehrenreich's daughter sitting in on this. She writes about how American society has become so militarized now, the New Deal programs, the social programs are so devastated. The only functioning part of our society is the military. She lives on a military base because not only did she become a Pentagon lawyer, she married a career officer. They live on a military base in America, and everything is smooth and efficient and clean on that base. As soon as you drive through the gate, she says, you come to wiped out, decaying America, jobless, homeless people. That's what we live in now. It's truly, I think, that's why science fiction, so much of what young people are watching now, it's science fiction, it's horror. I mean, I click around, on Comcast to see what movies to watch. And like 2/3 of this stuff is like scary, nightmarish movies about this dystopian future that we're living.
One final comment from Mnar, and then we have to open it up to the Q&A. Sorry, Mark, but we can elaborate in the Q&A.
Okay, I'll keep this short. Last night I had the honor to sit next to Elaine Wellis, who shared her story of how she basically was saved at the Kent State massacre. She was shot at and somebody took a bullet for her. And the reason we were talking about that is because she was protesting the Vietnam War. And we were discussing where in the hell is the anti-war movement today? And this has a lot to do with the elections because we are left choosing between two people who are literally competing over who's more crooked. And if we watch the elections, that's really the kind of yes, or more violent. We're being told that Donald Trump, he doesn't want to allow Muslims into the country. He hates Muslims. But no mention, of course, that Hillary Clinton has no problem dropping bombs on Muslims and her advocacy for regime change across the entire Middle East, from the Iraq War to Libya to Syria, and her funneling of weapons, as WikiLeaks has provided us, weapons to ISIS directly into their hands and directly into the hands of dictatorships across the world. And so I just want us to reflect very quickly on the anti-war movement and what Bernie Sanders really left us with. I really truly believe that Bernie Sanders had really good intentions, but let's face it, he helped co-opt the left into the Democratic Party. He convinced young liberal Americans that, you know what? Everything I just told you about Hillary Clinton, just kidding. Vote for her. Vote for her. And don't vote for a third party. We have candidates like Jill Stein, who this week was in the hospital. And she gave better answers to the debate in a hospital bed than Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton combined. Yet she is the silenced candidate. And so I hope that we'll all consider voting third party, because right now we are being told that a vote for third party is a wasted vote. But that's exactly how we get candidates just like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. If we actually voted based on our conscience, and we would vote for a third-party candidate of some sort. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but somebody from a third party, and that would start a revolution.
Yeah. So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Abby Martin, Mnar Muhawesh, Mark Crispin Miller, and David Talbot. And what just happened in the last hour or so? Just imagine if that was on the nightly news broadcast. Just imagine if that was on repeat over at CNN, right? Well, just imagine, because it's direct and deliberate that it is not on those channels. It's not an accident, and it's not news judgment. If it is, it's terribly poor news judgment, right? And so these folks are doing a lot of amazing work. So we're going to do a Q&A right now. It's going to be, we have about 20 minutes, maybe, but max, because we do have to clear out of here, and the university folks that are working, a lot of student workers, they have to clean up and get out of here. So I'm